Hello, everybody, and welcome to the third edition of Disruptive Fridays. My name is Elena Veljanovska, and I'm a senior project manager at the Disruption Network Lab. And today I will be your host and moderator to our Disruptive Fridays number 3. Before we start, I would like to say one big thanks to Rana Fadikari from Boiling Head Media, who is allowing us now for the second time to have an independent streaming platform, and additionally to Nada Bakar and Jonas Franki from our team, who are taking care of the production on and behind the screen. Today we will speak about self-organized care and care initiatives in times of Corona, and presenting several initiatives that are a great example of how citizens can care for each other. Our guests have been among the most active in creating tools for understanding and documenting the crisis, as well as actively working on the ground with other initiatives in helping the most affected. Their work is thinking about the current societal reorganization, but also inclusion of various at-risk communities. I wouldn't like to go very long here. I would really like to give space to our participants to present themselves. But just as a last note, I would say that we really would like you to take part. And before we start, I'm inviting you to actively be part of our discussion and ask questions via our chat on our website while we speak. And my colleague Nada is collecting them, and she will read them at a selection at the end of our talk. So please join. And now I would really like to expand our talk and maybe shortly to say with a short introduction by Valeria and Natasha, and then we will continue. Please. Valeria, maybe?
Yes, okay. So hello to everyone. Thanks to Disruptive Lab for having me. And thanks for everyone who's connected today to speak together. I hope everyone's doing well. And if so, I hope that you are involved in some form of solidarity for those who are not doing so well at this time, because there's definitely a lot of work to be done. I'm Valeria Graziano, and I'm here. I work as a researcher in the field of post-digital cultures, if that's a thing, in the UK. But aside from that, I'm here today to talk about a research process rather that I've been involved with others, which is called Pirate.care, and this is something that we've been engaged in for the last 2 years and a half. So it precedes the current moment, although the pandemic came and intersected the project in quite an impactful way for all involved, and of course for the team. So I guess I'll talk a little bit more about what we have been trying to think through with the framework of Pirate.care, and perhaps say a few words around the primary tool that the project is using, which is a collective online syllabus.
Thank you. And maybe I would like to just ask Natalia to shortly introduce herself so we know who is here with us today, and then we will continue with our talks.
Hey, everyone.
Natasha, sorry. Sorry, Natasha.
Yeah, it's okay. Yeah. I was like, is there an extra Natalia in the talking? Hi, everyone. I'd also like to thank you guys for having me on. My name is Natasha. I work as an organizer for various organizations, mostly based in the UK, but I've recently relocated to Berlin. And I'm at the current time organizing for Berlin Collective Action, which I will discuss throughout this talk, but is an initiative organized by Berlin-based collectives and is an emergency fund that is providing financial aid to those whose livelihoods have been severely impacted by COVID-19 and the current crises we are going through. Yeah.
Thank you, Natasha. It's really nice to have both of you here, and I'm really, as I said, following your initiatives from the beginning, and I'm really looking forward to really present them to our wider audience that is with us today, because there was a really big interest for this edition. So I would like to first invite Valeria to give a short presentation about the pirate.care.syllabus and initiative and everything that you guys and girls are have managed to collect in the last and everything in between.
Hopefully so. Sure. All right, so where to start? Really, the project started from a fairly simple consideration. I think many of us might share the observation that today, for a while now, actually, caring for the wrong people has become increasingly difficult. It is being made difficult. It has been discouraged or downright criminalized. And of course, there are no wrong people in that sense, but what I'm referring to are a number of realms, really, in provisions of welfare, provisions of care, access to services of various kinds that were, until recently, pretty much the cornerstones of what we understand as public life. And then those have been, in the last years, turned more and more into something that it's hard to recognize. So anything from healthcare, housing rights, access to knowledge and education, right to asylum, forms of mobility, and so on. All kinds of social benefits have been reshaped and redesigned in ways that made them either private services, therefore requiring a specific income level to be accessed. They've been at times weaponized to become tools of surveillance, punishment of the poor, punishment of the more vulnerable, that in many countries now are being asked to work in exchange for basic support. So this is pretty much the kind of trajectory and fantasy of a neoliberal policy that has been the main framework for reorganization of public services in many parts of the world. And on top of that, another very kind of phenomenon that everybody's observing is the return of the far right, which quite aggressively has been putting care work again at the center of a dystopian fantasy where around ideas of this supposed traditional natural family is really what it's trying to do is to roll back care work as something that is supposed to fall on the shoulders of mainly women. And of course, racialized bodies. So the name para-care pretty much came up as a way to start to think around and focus on the number of initiatives that actually have emerged in opposition to such political climate. And what we also notice is that a lot of the self-organized bottom-up initiatives are developing quite interesting ways of repurposing and using tools, and many of them are digital tools, to organize, to push back, to just run their operations. So we became a bit interested in this overlapping between care and the various ways this kind of work can be named, social reproduction, and the realm of piracy and civil disobedience. So Pirate Care wants to really started to map and create a network with a number of activists, organizers, educators, artists, thinkers, to try and pretty much bring together initiatives that are often very local and prior to the pandemic, quite hard to maybe hear about, and bring them together and see what happens once they are given support, a space to reflect on what's common maybe between them, but also to pretty much highlight the dynamics at the basis of what they're trying to achieve. And so from this mapping, what we've been thinking about is basically that there is, on the one hand, a phenomenon of care becoming more and more like piracy, in the sense that it's being criminalized, and many solidarity initiatives have to choose to position themselves vis-a-vis laws that are not protecting particularly life, but usually they protect state rationales or private property regimes. And then on the other hand, so for instance, just to give an example of this, one inspiring initiative would be Sea-Watch, which is an NGO that really exemplifies this idea of the pirate carer, as they coordinate a number of rescue missions in the Mediterranean to intercept the boats of the migrants that are trying to cross the sea. Another example that comes to mind of how care is being criminalized has to do with the reproductive rights and the provision of abortion pills. There's a great organization, for instance, called Women on Waves, who are, again, using boats or drones to deliver abortive pills in countries where this option is not available to women. And they would park the boat in international waters so that, again, it's not about breaking the law, but it exists in this gray area. So there's the variety of, so on the one hand, we have care practices and care initiatives starting to resemble more and more piracy initiatives or civil disobedience initiatives. And then on the other hand, what we also witness in parallel is somehow online phenomenon of digital piracy, taking on the shape more and more of not so much acts of perhaps disruption, as in a previous phase, but acts of custodianship. So I forgot to mention them by name, but one of the key co-conveners of the projects are Marcel Marz and Tomislav Medak, who are also shadow librarians, meaning that they have been maintaining for a number of years a project called Memory of the Word, which is in itself a pirate care practice in the sense that it provides free access to knowledge as an intervention in the regime of private property, and in that case, intellectual property. And there's a number of other examples one could give of piracy becoming more like care in the sense of like digital tools being repurposed for sustaining life. Another one I could give is the initiative Planka, which started in Sweden. And that's digitally coordinated illegal health, insurance against the fines that one would get on public transport. And those fines usually target migrant workers or migrant citizens who are not documented more. So in order to reclaim the right to mobility this insurance pretty much allows people not to pay their by paying into the insurance. There's like a fund that can be redistributed and used to cover that kind of cost. The last thing I'll say is that our point of entry for the project has been aligned before the crisis, actually, and it has taken the form of a collective syllabus, which pretty much is trying to document and become a tool for people to learn from these practices, and give them a space also for archiving all kinds of resources in a stable and more, kind of more protected environment. For this, we were very much inspired by a bunch of hashtag syllabi that were put together by social movements in the last 4 or 5 years. For instance, the Standing Rock syllabus, or there's a Ferguson syllabus, which was perhaps the first one. However, these hashtag syllabi usually are crowdsourced, but they tend to be dispersed online because they function through hashtagging. And I can say a bit more about that later if that's of interest. But the main point here was to try and create an open syllabus that can be remixed, readapted for different purposes, and but that is well maintained, and it can become over time some kind of archive protecting these kind of knowledges that are emerging from pirate care practices. There's so much more to say, but I think I'll end
definitely.
here. Sorry.
I will. Thank you. No. It's really great. I mean, it's a very rich project, and one can really go deeper into exploring it. And we will try to touch upon one or two aspects now during this edition. And I have one short question, maybe, on which I would just like you to expand a little bit, because as the name says it, and this is definitely something that I know that all of you are quite familiar and concerned with, the notion of piracy as a core of your work, and especially as understanding the piracy as a form of politics. So I would just like to ask you to expand a little bit in this area on the way you are using this notion in your work, in the syllabus and in general as a principle.
So piracy for us refers mainly to digital piracy, that moment. And what we take from these practices is mainly a focus on how private property is really not serving us well, or most of us well. Of course, some are not that disadvantaged from the arrangement, but the idea is that through playing around intellectual property, which is one form of private property, and digital piracy brought into the imaginary a different kind of horizon. So that can reverberate, for instance, if you think about how intellectual property is not serving as well in the realm of healthcare, where solutions to problems are immediately patented, or how that is failing people in terms of housing. And I know you guys are preparing some work on this issue. The way private property is failing people in terms of just global sustainability, agriculture, you name it, and you can find examples of that. So that was our point of entry. And then, of course, by building this syllabus online, we also try to perform what we talk about. So the tools that are using there follow a specific techno-political agenda, if you like, and that is to produce a tool that is open, and it uses free software at its core. And of course, a lot of initiatives are using and sharing information through Google Docs, Zoom, you name it, and that's fine. That's not the problem. But we feel it's also important to go and explore other ways of reshaping our relationship with technology, especially now, given the prominence that these tools are playing in reshaping sociality, I suppose. Yeah. So.
Yeah, well, yeah, there's plenty really to talk about, but now I think we can just expand on it a little bit more later. I would like to ask now Natasha to present the Berlin Collective Action Initiative, and also certainly something that we will definitely connect later while we speak, all of us. So give you the floor.
Thank you, Elena. Thank you, Elena. I'd just like to thank you, Valeria. Your work is amazing, especially where this kind of form of radical care intercepts with, I would love to discuss. I think we will in the second half. So I am here on behalf of the Berlin Collective Action Initiative. And so the BCA initiative started about a month ago in reaction to the crisis, when several people in the scene, organizations like Equa, Polyartis and Dogma came together with members from different collectives, such as Berlin Strippers Collective, Host Aware, Lecken, Room for Resistance, Radiant Love, TS Raver, and 2F, to try and work out and come up with a very swift way of redistributing much needed resources and support to people in the community that are most severely impacted by the crisis. And those that are most severely impacted are precarious and low-income workers, non-EU migrants and people of color, trans and gender non-conforming people, sex workers, and those with pre-existing conditions who might therefore be more socially isolated, and those for whom alternative systems of support, whether state-provided support or more informal systems of support or care, do not exist. And so I personally work on the distribution working group. I'll go into that a little bit further. But when we started doing the bulk of our work and worked on trying to set up an inclusive, equitable, and transparent redistribution system, obviously this is kind of the crux almost of the organization, is making sure that we have the system set up. Where this initiative kind of started within the realms of nightlife workers, we quickly realized that our solidarity could not exclusively be limited to the nightlife, but we had to extend for instance, to workers such as sex workers or people with migratory backgrounds in a wider sense. And not just focusing on the nightlife community, which is also severely impacted during this time. We also decided to work with organizations each week in different initiatives to ensure that these amazing initiatives are able to function during this time and also exist after the crisis. The first organization we worked with was Olga, which is an organization for sex workers, especially sex workers, street workers, and drug-using women and trans sex workers. So we worked with Olga, and then the next week we worked with GLAD, which is an amazing organization also of Black and POC lesbians, gays, bisexuals, trans, inter, and queers in Berlin, working against racism, sexism, transphobia, and homophobia, ableism, and other forms of discrimination. I mean, as far as from the start, we benefited a great deal from organizing tools developed from our previous social justice backgrounds, but also tried as hard as we can to build a decentralized, leaderless structure that remains open to learning, improvement, and new members, because we are really learning as things go along. I mean, we had to react very quickly and build up a structure very quickly. And it was hours and hours and hours of unpaid labor, also for workers, most people that have lost their job otherwise. But yeah, I mean, it's really been, I feel so grateful to be working on this initiative and to be working with the amazing people that I have been working with, which has just responded in such a fantastic way. But yeah, we are still ever growing, as this crisis is not, this is not, crisis didn't start in a day and won't end in a day. This is kind of, what does mutual aid really look like going forward? Also, how do we build community? How do we build care that doesn't just end when this ends, but keeps going? Because, I mean, it's really a crisis of capitalism. Anyway, we'll talk a little bit more about that later, but so our main goal is to redistribute funds to people who need urgent care and need urgent financial support through the crisis. And those that don't have access to state or other informal types of support, I think, is maybe key. We also provide resources for those that are a little bit, I mean, German bureaucracy is I think we all know about German bureaucracy, and especially during a time of crisis, which is extremely stressful, it's very hard to then go apply for things like Hartz IV or Wochengeld or the IBB grant, especially without knowing the language. So how do we provide resources people can send an email to their landlord in German saying, will you... can I have a rent reduction or a rent holiday? Or this is exactly how to apply for Hartz IV in English. Things like this. So it's not only redistributing funds, but it's also like allowing the building of resources, which is something that Pirate.care, I'm very excited to talk about later with you. So I guess this is maybe like a little bit about the organization and how it's functioning. So right now we are registering as a Verein with 12 members at present. In practice, we are a horizontal decentralized organization, and our work is divided into 4 main working groups. So we have fundraising. Obviously, in order to distribute funds, you need funds in the first place. Then we have outreach, and outreach works with the collectives that we're working with, and providing resources and working in this. And then we have admin and finance and tech. And then we have the funding distribution committee, which is the committee that I am organizing with. And then there's also subgroups within this, and our structure is open and flexible and adaptive, and aims to grow as we grow and as the crisis unfolds. So we went online on about a month ago, on the 19th of March, and since then we have raised 37,000 euro, which has been distributed to 131 individuals, which is fantastic. We would love to, it's been a fantastic process, but we are still growing and hope to still grow. Moving forward, it's hard, especially as the crisis unfolds, to keep trajectory, because there is, as the crisis unfolds, I mean, there's this immediate reaction, and then but we have to see like I mean, this is kind of what is happening. It can be seen as like a collective trauma that all of us are experiencing, but experiencing in different ways. I mean, some of us have a home to go back to and savings or support from the state or support from families or access to resources and this kind of knowledge in order to, where do I go to apply for resources? Where do I, etc. But a lot of people don't. And this is where the pandemic, is really, I mean, it's a pandemic of inequality. And this is what we're realizing more and more. I mean, yeah, of course.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I think that's like us in summary. I can go into a bit further detail later if necessary. But yeah, I think that's kind of us.
Yeah, thank you for giving it. I mean, giving a very sorry. This is really brief that we have to do it in such a short time. But let's see. Maybe the audience will also touch upon certain questions. Definitely, I would like to have more. But I just have one quick question for you as well. Probably also crucial would be like, how do you distribute the funds? How do you manage to decide about the urgency for the support? And on which basis do you make your decisions? Because it's probably not easy. Probably there is a huge need for such support. So maybe quickly, I would like to talk about your mechanisms of how do you approach this? Because you also said that you're part of the decision-making body for distribution. So yeah.
Yeah, of course. I mean, this is obviously, a very crucial part of the organization, but also, I mean, a very difficult part. So the way that we organize is basically the fund is open to everybody that is affected by the crisis. And originally it was kind of an affiliation with Nightlife, but we had a very broad understanding of nightlife worker. And this included sex workers, and it's kind of been also shifted to include those with migratory backgrounds and refugees and asylum seekers, etc. And those, I think the crucial thing is those that don't have access to other forms of support during this time. So I guess the groups we prioritize are low-income people, non-EU migrants, people living without official status in Germany, so those that are undocumented, those that aren't registered, those that are living Black, and then of course BIPOC and disabled, and those that are unable or unsafe during quarantine, and also those that don't have access to other forms of financial support. So I guess the way that our committee works is we have our working group, which is comprised of I think about 6 members, and then we have the allocation committee. And so the allocation committee then has 3 members from the working group, but then we invite people from the broader organization in each week in order to discuss the cases at hand and kind of categorize them into risk tiers. So how great is this person's risk during this time, and how much can we allocate them? And then this is also being opened up to our broader collectives, so that we constantly have fresh opinions and experience and ideas on how this process should look, because it's completely a learning process. And so we have a facilitator, and then we have other people from the working group, and then I'll kind of quickly say the risk tiers. So risk tier A, there's 2 categories. Like financial emergency is like an A would be physically unsafe, fearing deportation, and in terms of identity and priority, somebody who is disabled, immunocompromised, and those with dependents. A risk category B would maybe be sex workers, asylum seekers, also LGBTQI+, BIPOC and non-EU migrants. And a C would be precarious workers, so artists, DJs, bar jobs, garden robber, And then with all that information, obviously a lot of people cross a lot of categories. And then we have high risk, so many intersections of systematic oppression and highly volatile financial situation and no access to other support systems. A B is medium risk, so many intersections of systematic oppression or highly volatile situation with no access to other support systems. And then a C is low risk as everybody else. We always try to provide food for those that ask. And so, yeah, we would love to be able to give everybody everything that they're asking for. But yeah, I mean, unfortunately, it's not possible. And we do have to prioritize those that are most at risk during this time. So I guess a brief on like 30. So for an example, 38% of our funds went to high risk individuals over the first 2 weeks, and 28 to medium, and then 15 to the low tier. So this is kind of how we've chosen to distribute. But yeah. I could go on.
Wow, I see that we are a bit ahead of time, but let's see. I wanted to ask you one more question, but I see that we are a bit pressed, so I will really. Are we still hearing? Yeah. Maybe. Yeah, it's. I would ask you for maybe like a short or brief answers, because I wanted to expand a bit our conversation and look a bit on something that the both of you mentioned, on how the burden of the crisis is distributed, basically, because we are becoming acutely aware of the dependence of the care sector on women, but also we are aware of the precarity of the work conditions or even unpaid care work that women do. So basically, the pandemic is just putting even more responsibilities on women caretakers, who are basically making up the majority of the care labor force. And on the other hand, also, you mentioned it, Valeria, in your introductions as well. The lockdown is limiting the right to safe abortions or access to contraceptives for women, and there is a growth of registered domestic violence. So my question was really, as COVID is here to stay with us, how do you see the current situation through the feminist lens, as you would formulate it in the Pirate Care curriculum? And do you see a danger of a reinforcement of the patriarchal model and the heteronormative narrative in politics and society? I know it's a huge question, but I would give us a few minutes, and then
a short answer is yes.
I know it's very short, but somehow I see it also very important to raise it with the two of you, at least.
No, of course. In summary, well, I suppose it's kind of interesting, because when thinking of care in some way, the topic gets immediately genderized, but sometimes in a way that it's kind of tricky to work with, because it immediately conjures up these ideas of care as something like nice and feminine, and that happens in the domestic realm. So I think what we're learning from the pandemic is precisely to pay attention and really to reposition care as a capacity of society at large, but also something that is not intrinsic ethics. It's labor that is skilled, that it needs organization, it needs support, it needs tools, it needs knowledges, and it's presently actually worldwide readable through a gendered lens. In a transfeminist scenario, the people that are disproportionately not cared for, and those who do most of the care labor, that are gendered bodies and racialized bodies. So that's the starting point of any reflection. Everything was there before the virus, and I really like what Natasha was saying about the pandemic being a crash course on existing inequalities, pretty much. In terms of what we'll be mapping in Pirate Care is all of the three things you mentioned, Elena. So reproductive rights being curtailed, and this not just happening in countries that have been struggling to bring reproductive health care to the fore, but in countries where this was until not long ago taken as a kind of a given right or provision. So, for instance, we hear of a really great initiative in terms of pirate care is been happening in Italy, where parts of the Non Una di Meno movement, which is part of the transnational global feminist movement, they have a branch who is called Obiezione Respinta, that basically has been mapping, actively providing in real time informations around where it's possible to get services. Because a lot of hospitals and pharmacies would refuse services in Italy. Italy being one of those countries where there is this option of conscientious objection available to medical staff. So that's one. There's similar initiatives happening that we know of in Austria. And again, our knowledge is by no means comprehensive. We're always very happy to get in touch with more initiatives documenting. But in Austria as well, I think the news was that there's one clinic, one public facility left at the moment that offers terminations of pregnancies. Yeah, maybe I stop here because I'm aware of time.
Okay, yes. Yeah, I didn't want to give a sign, but it's just, it's a very big topic, unfortunately, but sorry for putting in such a short.
No worries.
I would also like to hear from the audience what they want to ask. So please, Natasha. Sorry.
Fantastic article by Plan C, which is an organization that organizes in the UK, and it's called Building a Feminist Response to the Pandemic. I think we can supply a link to it. One of the quotes was, "Unfortunately, patriarchal violence does not rest, nor will it be quarantined." And I think, for me, talking about care work, but also about social reproduction, as we see through essential workers or key work during this time, a lot of this key work is done by women or gender non-conforming people, but really seeing that social reproduction is essential to the survival, and it's kind of the crux of capitalism, and this is kind of shown in any crisis under capitalism. And I guess highlighting the extreme undervalued nature of the work and how much of this work is done, for free. The billions of people over the globe that have just become care workers and that have no access to like PPE, protective, any protections, or not being tested. And it's, I guess the crisis is really opening the floodgates. And I guess what I've seen in a lot of the reactions to the crisis is that we as women and gender non-conforming people are so often at the forefront of the struggle and also at the forefront of the resistance. And this is something that I've really been feeling during this time, seeing sex work communities stand up, seeing very marginalized queer communities standing up and creating mutual aid, and building solidarity between community. And I guess this keyword of community for me, and where does care, social reproduction, and community really fit into each other. And this is obviously something that's shouldn't just be during crisis. It's something that we should be building all of the time. I organized for Women's Strike, which is an that also runs in the UK, and actually on the 8th of March, on Women's Day, there was a huge strike just before lockdown.
Just before
just before lockdown, which and just striking against the undervaluement under capitalism of social reproduction. And so I think it's a very interesting time now, and also a very interesting lens to look at the crisis in. yeah, I could also keep going, but because of time, maybe I'll wrap it there.
Yeah, it's we have to do it in another form. Expand on this question. Now, I would like to ask my colleague Nada to share the questions from the audience with us, and probably that will also lead us into certain directions. Nada, can we hear you?
Hello. Yes.
Hey,
Do you hear me?
hello.
Okay,
Yes.
hello. Thank you, Natasha, Valeria, and Elena. It has been like super inspiring to hear your talk. And I have a couple of questions. I will say all the questions, and then on your own time, you can get back to it. So the first question is for Valeria, and it's asking, do you have any legal support, for example, volunteers or lawyers, to help negotiate these gray zones in case of persecution? And also another question for Valeria is that in our next Disruptive Friday, we're going to be discussing the topic of tracking and surveillance. So from your perspective, how can we still protect the vulnerables while also avoiding surveillance for the creation of corona tracking apps, which we have seen already like surfacing? A question for Natasha is on what level of technical knowledge is needed for people who would love to join your initiative? And the last question to both of you is, are you getting any political pushback with your initiatives? And I will leave you here. We have like still 13 minutes to go to answer the question and also end the talk. So thank you very much. Ciao.
Thank you, Nada.
Thank
She's
you.
our timekeeper in the organization. But thanks for the questions as well. So I give the floor to you.
Okay, shall I start? Wow, so they're big questions, and thanks to the persons who put them forward. If we work with lawyers directly, no, in the sense that we exist as a visible side, the side of the process that has visibility exists as a cultural project. So in that way, we are grateful to some parts of the cultural world, which is a very complex beast in its own right. But there is a part of that world, the art, the cultural organizations that have been, we found, very open to take the risks with us. So they provide, in effect, an infrastructure where certain discussions and certain practices can come to light with some degree of protection. And also some parts of the academia, I should say. And maybe in terms of the politics of how to interact with the law, that could be perhaps a takeaway point, is that we are, I think, in a moment when it is time to reclaim the institutions in so many ways. And one of the functions that they could provide perhaps is protection from laws that are not working very well, or at least they can provide some kind of buffer there. Yeah. Individually, projects that we are collaborating with and we're learning from, I should say, they do often have legal teams if they do kinds of work that kind of is trying to repoliticize the juridical realm. Tracking and surveillance, it's really beyond my competence to answer that one. Is a very it's very much on everyone's mind, I suppose. In terms of technical terms, I'm not sure where the best answers lie. If not, in terms of practices, which I think sometimes can think better than theory, I'm very interested by how just the politics of use is forcing some of these corporations to revisit their policies. For instance, even Zoom, who has been come to scrutiny very recently, had to kind of take away their function of tracking attention of workers just this April, I think a few weeks ago. So I wouldn't underestimate the fact that there is a possibility through civil disobedience to make demands. But beyond that, it remains a very, very kind of important topic to keep thinking about. And I suppose in terms of political pushback, I find it's the kind of terrain in which we move in is a whole pushback. I don't know. Fortunately, I must say we have not yet, not so far, had any violent encounter with any actor. I'm interested, perhaps this is the last thing I'll say, and then I'll go. But I'm interested now. We're following closely this phenomenon that is happening in certain parts of the world, where I think part of the criminalization of care is producing this policing citizen, or this kind of is initiating this attitude of people spying on people, on good behaviors, pandemic shaming, all this kind of weird affect that is circulating in bodies, and I'm interested in how that might evolve. Hopefully not too much to the far right, but I think it's definitely something for all of us to take care and heal, and not allow segments of society to go into paranoia too much, because that's also stuff. Yeah, that's where I'm at with that.
Thank you. That will definitely keep us busy for a while.
Yeah.
That topic. Natasha, to you.
No technical knowledge is really required, apart from what's learned by just doing. I had such little idea of the different like state support and things like this that existed in Germany, having not been here so long. But it's something you really learn as you go along. And what is amazing about the collective is, or just the initiative in general is the ability to learn as we go. Obviously, we have people that are very, very skilled in, like, I come from more of a grassroots organizing background. So my knowledge of dealing with like press in like a very certain ways, it's something that I'm learning. So technical knowledge, how would you get involved if this was kind of part of the question? So of course, when I talked about this rotating distribution committee, so basically, this is something that we have opened up to our collectives, but also to those that want to be involved. And basically, it's a one-day commitment. There's one call that happens every Tuesday. It can be about a 4 to 5 hour call. It's long and it's a bit grueling, but this is where we go through the cases. And so this is kind of open to our collectives, and this is to kind of broaden our reach. And and like things like through sharing the thing on social media, or by sharing the campaign, or by sharing the link to people that have wealth to redistribute. This is really helping us actually on the ground to because we can't redistribute money without no money in the first place. So please send us an email if you would like to be involved. We're completely open to outside help.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we are now at the point where I would like to ask Tatiana Bazzicelli to join us and introduce the next Disruptive Friday and the meetup that we are preparing also for the 22nd of April. Tatiana, can I? Hello.
For this very interesting discussion. I really enjoy it, and in a sense, we were already touching upon the discourse of next week. I was the person asking the question about tracking and surveillance. And this is what we are going to speak about. The next topic will be virus tracking and surveillance. And at the moment, there is a big debate on the necessity of creating apps that from one side are helping to track the people that tested positive, also to avoid to get in contact with other potential vulnerable people. But the other side, there is also a big debate on surveillance, if this is actually an issue that we should consider, and if it's also possible to create apps respecting privacy. And we have invited 3 great speakers also next time. There will be Lori Love, that is well known as an expert of surveillance, and also somebody that have been working a lot on the discourse of privacy. He was also part of the Anonymous Collective and the Occupy movement in the past, and he has been also facing potential extradition to US. So it's a very big and interesting perspective that we can bring through also his own experience. And yeah, we are really happy to have him with us. Then we have Joanna Moll, that we also invited at the Disruption Network Club in November, that is working with tracking since a really long time and also researching on the subject. She also is an expert of how corporations are tracking us, so we will hear her point of view. And Julian Finn, that is also a hacker and media artist from Germany, and has been involved in the hacker German scene since 20 years. So we will understand also what is the point of view from Germany, that is also a country that at the moment is working on developing this kind of apps. So this will be again next Friday at 5. We will be live. And at the same time, also I would like to introduce the next community meetup that Like and Nada are producing. This will be the 22nd of April, Eviction in Times of Crisis, with the group of syndicates and also the Zwangsräumung verringert. And we will speak about what is the consequence on housing and eviction during these times, because of course this is still happening, and people are getting much more vulnerable also economically. So we also have to fight and face the discourse of eviction. And this will be a very interesting sharing with this collective. The people need to register. So if you want to register, you have to write to us. Just go on our website. There is all the information also on our Facebook group. So this is the announcement for next week. And thank you so much, everybody, for today. But I leave the final thanks to Elena. Thank you, Elena, for this great moderation. And see you, everybody, also next week.
Thank you, Tatiana. Obviously, more and more program will be coming from our side in the coming days. This is also how we are fighting the COVID lockdown here in Berlin. So I would really like to thank both of you. It was really great having you, even though the time was very short. It was really great to still being able to present your initiatives that I find both of them super crucial for this time. And everyone who would like to know more, I think they will be now having even more information to dig in. Yeah, I was very happy to have you for this hour. And for the rest of you watching there, I would really like to ask you to support the Berlin Collective Action Crisis Fund, because they still need a lot of funds to do their job. And then also to invite you to join our Twitter, Facebook, and newsletter. And definitely have a nice weekend, and see you next Friday.
Thank you so much.